Welcome, friends, to the Secret Doctrine webinar. Today we are going to start with stanza 6. Stanza 6 describes the formation and the evolution of our globe, the Earth, especially in the second part of the stanza. As we are going to see, the first part approaches the point in evolution in which we are at right now, and this is what we are going to see today. So let us start as usual with a summary, the small summary that Blavatsky did of all the stanzas. She says, the subsequent stages in the formation of a world are indicated in stanza 6. The first part of the stanza that we will see today can be applied to the formation of any world, while the second part talks specifically about the Earth. So she says that this formation of the world, the stages are indicated in stanza 6, which brings the evolution of such a world down to its fourth great period, corresponding to the period in which we are now living. So the second part of the stanza will talk about the fourth round. This is what she means by period, which is the evolutionary cycle in which we are at right now. So let us begin with the first shloka of this stanza that the title is Our World, Its Growth and Development. The shloka says, by the power of the Mother of Mercy and Knowledge, Kuan Yin, the triple of Kuai Shai Yin, residing in Kuai Yin Tien, Fohat, the breath of their progeny, the son of the sons, having called forth from the lower abyss, chaos, the elusive form of Xian Chan, our universe, and the seven elements. As you can see, this stanza has Chinese names. This is the first stanza in which we see several Chinese names. Normally we have Sanskrit names, sometimes we have some Tibetan names. So Blavatsky explains no exoteric religious system has ever adopted a female creator, and thus woman was regarded and treated from the first dawn of popular religions as inferior to men. It is only in China and Egypt that Kuan Yin and Isis were placed on a par with the male gods. The Brahmanical Vak, which Brahmanical means Hindu, what we call now Hindu, so the Hindu Vak seems in many an aspect to approach the Chinese Kuan Yin, but there is no regular worship of Vak under this name in India, as there is of Kuan Yin in China. So you see here Blavatsky presents one of the problems that she had when trying to translate these stanzas. She explains that the original stanzas are in a language that is unknown to us. She called it Senzar. That language seems to be mainly a pictorial language, a language of symbols, although there are some words that sometimes Blavatsky refers to as coming from the Senzar, so there may be a written form of the Senzar too. But then these stanzas are translated in several languages. At the very beginning of the Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky gives us the words in one of the shlokas of the first stanza, the words in Tibetan. So that would be an example of the Tibetan translation of the original stanzas. Then there is also a Sanskrit translation, we may presume, because most of the stanzas use Sanskrit terms. And there is also obviously one Chinese translation of the stanzas. For these particular stanzas, she had to choose the Chinese translation to translate now into English, because no other tradition except for Egypt, but Egypt is a religion that is far more removed from our knowledge right now. So it would feel more strange if Blavatsky had used a presumably existent Egyptian translation. So no other religion except for the Egyptian and the Chinese religion had a name for a goddess that was regarded as a creator. So Blavatsky always says we have our own names for all these entities. When we talk about Mula Prakriti or Parabrahman or Dhyani Buddhas or Kuan Yin, she says the esoteric philosophy has its own names, but to provide these names would be useless and confusing for most people. So when translating the stanzas, she had to choose those religions that had a similar concept to the one that the esoteric philosophy means. Now, similar doesn't mean the same. So when Blavatsky uses Mula Prakriti for this pre-cosmic substance, she's using it because the Hindu concept of Mula Prakriti approaches that concept of the pre-cosmic substance, but it's not exactly the same. If you take Mula Prakriti in the way that it is described in the Secret Doctrine, it's not the same as what most Hindus understand by Mula Prakriti. Close but different. So in this particular stanza, she has to use Chinese concepts because they are the closest to what the esoteric philosophy refers to. So we will see this. So the first thing that the stanza talks about is this Kuan Yin, by the power of the Mother of Mercy, Kuan Yin, and that Mother of Mercy is described as the triple of Kuai Shai Yin. So we have two Chinese words here. Blavatsky explains, Mother of Mercy and Knowledge is called the triple of Kuan Shai Yin because in her correlations, metaphysical and cosmical, she is the mother, the wife, and the daughter of the Logos, the Shakti or energy, the essence of the three. So this is also something that we don't find in current Chinese philosophy, in current Buddhist Chinese philosophy. Blavatsky says in the Secret Doctrine that Kuan Yin and Kuan Shai Yin are two different deities. Now what we see today is that the two are names for the same deity. In Blavatsky's view, Kuan Shai Yin is the male counterpart of Kuan Yin, which is the female. Kuan Shai Yin would be the male logos, and Kuan Yin is the female logos. And she says that the Kuan Yin is called the triple because the relationship of Kuan Yin to Kuai Shai Yin, to the relationship of the female to the male, is triple. She says she is the mother of the Logos, she is the wife of the Logos, and she's also the daughter of the Logos. And this is explained because the manifested Logos is born in the bosom of the feminine principle. Remember, in the first sloka of stanza 1, it is said, the eternal parent wrapped in her ever invisible robes. So the first principle that we can talk about is feminine, her robes, the shloka says. It is within this feminine principle that the Logos is born, that the male Logos, the active Logos is born. So in this way, the female aspect is the mother of the Logos. Now, once the Logos is born and begins its activity, along with the feminine principle, produces the universe. So symbolically speaking, allegorically speaking, in that function, the female principle is the wife of the male principle because the two of them together produce the universe. So she is the mother before the Logos is born, or within which the Logos is born, Then she is the wife of the Logos, along with whom the universe is created. And then is also the daughter of the Logos, because then matter, the material principle, which is an expression of the female principle in the cosmos, guided by the divine plan that is in the mind of the male aspect of the Logos, guided by that divine plan, the matter is shaped in all the different forms, and in that capacity, the material forms are the daughters of the Logos. So we can see how, allegorically speaking, matter precedes the Logos, then acts along with the Logos, and is also the result of the Logos, especially in its manifested aspect. Now, another aspect of the feminine, we have to remember that these are all aspects of the same principle. It's not that there are two logoi, the female and the masculine. Blavatsky says many times, all these principles have the two potentialities in them, are androgynes or androgynous. Andro means the male, and gyne means the female. Androgynous, that comes from these two words, is one that has both principles in one. So Blavatsky says all these principles are androgynous, but then according to what aspect is really working in the universe is that we refer to it as him or her. Another aspect of the feminine side of the universe is the Shaktis, or energy, as she says there. In some of her writings, Blavatsky says the Shaktis are the feminine aspects of Fohat and its 7 sons. We are going to see that there is a reference to the 7 sons of Fohat, and there is also a reference to the seven Shaktis. Shakti is a Sanskrit word that is a feminine word. So this shloka begins by pointing out to the feminine aspect of matter and energy. As Blavatsky said, it's only in the Egyptian and Chinese philosophy where this feminine aspect is clearly recognized and even worshipped. Now the next phrase, it says Kuan Yin residing in Kuan Yin Tian. So Blavatsky explains that Kuan Yin Tian means the melodious heaven of sound, the abode of Kuan Yin. So Kuan Yin, as the feminine logos, the female logos, resides or has its abode in this heaven of sound. You see how there is a connection between voice or sound. Remember we said there is the voice, which is feminine, and the sound that comes out of this voice, which is the word, is the manifested logos. So here again there is this idea of the divine voice, which is Kuan Yin, residing on this plane, which is the origin of what we call sound. Now sound, we have to take it in an abstract way. Maybe we could say today vibration. There is a plane that is the origin of vibration, which on the physical plane may become sound. And Kuan Yin, the female potency, the female energy, resides on that plane. And Blavatsky says that this voice is a synonym of verbum, or the word, speech as the expression of thought. Remember, we already discussed this. There is the divine thought, then there is that would be the idea, then there is the voice, that would be the medium through which the idea is going to be expressed, and then we have the word, or the actual uttered word, which that would be the manifested expression of the divine thought. So in that way we have the unmanifested logos, Then we have the second logos, that is the means by which or through which the unmanifested becomes manifested. Blavatsky goes on, the female logos, so to speak, the goddess of the active forces in nature, the word, voice, or sound and speech. Kuan Yin is the magic potency of occult sound in nature and ether, which voice calls forth Xian Chan, which is the elusive form of the universe, out of chaos and the seven elements. So we will see all this. There are the elements, which are the main constituents of the universe, what will become the seven planes. And there is this voice which call upon these elements to bring them into forms and structures through which consciousness can evolve. Now, then the shloka goes on to talk about fohat. So we first have the voice, the feminine aspect, then we have fohat, which is more of the masculine aspect. This is a pattern. Blavatsky says in one of her commentaries on the Secret Doctrine that, philosophically speaking, the feminine is always first. Within the feminine, the masculine is born. If you take the feminine as the potential and the masculine as the active, then you can say potentiality is eternal, and then that becomes active every now and then with each cycle of evolution. So this is why, philosophically speaking, we must begin, if we go beyond what we can really talk about, we must begin with the whatever is neutral, whatever is beyond any differentiation, that is the absolute. But as soon as we talk about something that is differentiated, the first differentiation is female, from which follows the male differentiation, the masculine differentiation. In this case would be fohat, and fohat, the breath of their progeny. So we saw all this also. From the voice come the hierarchies of beings, from the primordial seven down, and from these hierarchies of being come fohat. So fohat is the son of the sons of the female logos, the sons being the celestial beings. So fohat, the breath of their progeny, the son of the sons, having called forth from the lower abyss, from the chaos, the elusive form of Xian Chan, our universe, and the seven elements. You see, the lower abyss, the chaos, this is the primordial matter of the manifested universe, and more particularly of the four lower planes of the universe, the planes of form. Remember that we saw that the three higher planes are divine planes, where the logoi manifest, and the four lower are the planes where the planets are formed, the planetary chains. So especially from this lower abyss, from the primordial matter of the lower planes, then the universe of illusion is called forth by means of fohat. Blavatsky gives in some other writing a description of these seven elements. She uses in different presentations different names, so we don't have to get too stuck with one particular nomenclature, but this can serve for our purposes. There is the lowest of all the elements is what we call earth, which in Sanskrit is Bhumi or Prithivi. Then we have the next element, which is water, Apas in Sanskrit. Then we have air, Vayu, and then we have fire, Agni or Tejas. These are the four elements that are quite well known even in the Western tradition within alchemy and the Western esotericism: earth, water, air, and fire. These are the elements within the four lower planes. Then we have ether, which is the fifth element. When talking in a more universal way, Blavatsky sometimes uses the word akasha, but in this particular approach, she uses it for the highest of all the planes. Then we have the divine flame, and then we have space, which is akasha. Akasha means space or sky. So these are the seven elements that conform the manifested universe. Now, in this particular table, Blavatsky relates the elements to the abodes of different entities, different beings within the hierarchy of beings. So she says on earth, meaning the physical plane, this is the abode of men and animals. Now, water can be compared to the astral plane, and this is the abode of the elemental forces, the nature spirits, and the elementaries, which are the soul of the departed, but especially those souls who are still attached to the physical plane. In a certain sense, we could say that these are the earthbound spirits, because this astral plane is a lower aspect of the inner planes, and that is described by water. Then we have a higher aspect of this astral plane, which we could call it a kamic plane, and this is the place for higher elementals. And then we have the plane of fire, which is connected to the lower manas, to the lower mind, the lower mental plane, which is the highest plane of the Rupa Devas. Rupa means form, and Devas is like angels. So we have here in the four lower planes the different hierarchies that, or entities that reside on them. And if we compare them with the principles, we have the lower manas corresponding to fire, Kama corresponding to air, the astral image corresponding to water, and the body corresponding to earth. Now on the three higher planes, we have the abode of the Kumaras, the sons of Mahat. The son of Mahat are the primordial seven. This corresponds in a human being with higher manas, with the reincarnating ego, with the soul. And then there is the eternal inconsumable substance, which corresponds with Buddhi. There are hierarchies on these levels, but they are far more difficult for us to conceive. They don't really differentiate. They are eternal throughout the Manvantara. And they have the plane of the noumenal, of the causes, which correspond to the Atmic aura. So this is just to give you a sense of these seven elements, which are at the same time the seven planes, and how they correspond to human beings. So the first shloka is about that under the directive of Kuan Yin, of the female Logos, the Mother of Mercy, then Fohat activates and calls upon the elementary particles of each plane to generate the illusory universe, especially on the lower planes, on which evolution will take place. Now the second shloka says, the swift and the radiant one produces the seven Layu centers, against which none will prevail, to the great day be with us, and sits the universe on these eternal foundations, surrounding Sien Chan with the elementary germs. So let's see little by little what this means. We begin with the swift and the radiant one produces the seven Layu centers. So the radiant one may be interpreted either as an allegorical way to talk about Fohat as an entity, or the Logos, which is the source of Fohat. But Blavatsky focuses on the idea of the Layu centers. And she says Layu comes from the Sanskrit Laya. We have already explored this idea of Laya, the Laya state, and the Laya centers. She says the point of matter where every differentiation has ceased. So Laya, remember, is a state. It's not necessarily a point in space. It's a state of matter where matter is not yet differentiated, where matter is homogeneous. It's a primordial state, which sometimes Blavatsky would call substance. She would make the difference between substance as being the homogeneous aspect and matter being the differentiation. So here there is talk about 7 centers of matter in this particular state of undifferentiation. So she says the 7 Layu centers are the 7 points at which, in esotericism, the scale of reckoning of differentiation begins. So now we see that differentiation begins on 7 different levels. We will see what this means. From the centers beyond which esoteric philosophy allows us to perceive the dim metaphysical outlines of the 7 suns of life and light, the 7 logoi. From the 7 centers begin the differentiation of the elements which enter into the constitution of our solar system. So these 7 suns of light, life and light, are hierarchies of beings that are beyond the 7 manifested planes. Being beyond the 7 manifested planes, they are self-existing. They exist throughout the whole Manvantara without being really produced as the lower hierarchies are. When talking about them, Blavatsky says that there is very little that we can speculate about these hierarchies. From our point of view, beyond the 7 planes, there is only non-differentiated absoluteness. There is no way that from our point of view we can make any differentiation in that which is beyond the 7 manifested planes. And yet, that which from our point of view seems absolute, on that level there is some kind of differentiation, and there are some forms of life and consciousness beyond our speculation. So these 7 suns of life and light are beyond the 7 Laya centers. The Laya centers belong to the manifested universe. It's the beginning, the 7 points in which differentiation begins. And these 7 points are the states in which the 7 elements begin to evolve, those elements that make up the solar system. Now she explains, when Fohat is said to produce 7 Laya centers, it means that for formative or creative purposes, the great law, theists may call it God. So you can see how Blavatsky is very reluctant to talk about the source of divine thought, the source of the divine plan, to call it God, especially because of all the anthropomorphic ideas that we have about God. So she prefers to call it the great law. And she says that the 7 Laya centers for formative or are the points where, from the point of view of the formative or creative purposes, the great law stops, or rather modifies its perpetual motion on 7 invisible points within the area of the manifested universe. Now, this is all allegorical. When we talk about centers, when we talk about points, these 7 points, it's just due to the limitations of our language. So Blavatsky is saying basically there is one law. That law is motion, eternal motion, but that motion modifies itself in 7 different ways. Those 7 different ways are the beginning of differentiation of the 7 elements, as we are going to see. And then she quotes from the Occult Catechism. She says, "The great breath digs through space 7 holes into Laya to cause them to circumgyrate during Manvantara." So there is this idea of making holes into Laya, and from these holes the system is going to be developed. But again, we have to take this in an allegorical way. We are going to see what this means in a diagram that will help to make some idea or some image in our minds. And she goes on, or the shloka does, these 7 Layu centers, against which none will prevail, to the great day be with us. We already discussed this in previous classes. The great day be with us is when the whole universe, the whole 7 manifested planes, come back to a state of rest, of unity, and then these Laya centers disappear because the whole universe is in a state of Laya, in a state of non-differentiation. And this is the great day be with us, or remain with us, or rest with us, where all entities that were separated now become the one life. This is what Blavatsky explained earlier. And then the shloka says, "and sits the universe on these eternal foundations." So these 7 Laya centers are the foundations for the universe. And Blavatsky explains, such 7 neutral centers then are produced by Fohat. You see 7 neutral centers, neutral in the sense of non-differentiated. It's a state of matter where there is no polarity, there is no positive and negative. And these are produced by Fohat, who, when, as Milton has it, fair foundations are laid whereon to build, quickens matter into activity and evolution. So beginning from these 7 Laya centers, Fohat begins to differentiate each one of them into different elements, and these become the foundation for the building of the universe. So if we want to think of this in a diagram, here we have represented with the darker lines 2 planes, in any planes. You know, the first one is contained between these two thick lines, and the second plane is contained between these other 2. Blavatsky in her commentary says that each plane is again subdivided in 7 subplanes. So we see here within one plane there is the subdivision of the 7 subplanes. Now the first subplane in each plane is what we could call the Laya center of the plane, because this is the atomic state of that particular matter. So suppose this lowest plane is the physical plane. There are different states for matter, which we call solid, liquid, gaseous, then what we call plasma, the 4th state of matter. And these are the matters, the states of form. You know, always remember that the 4 lower have form, the 3 higher are formless, relatively speaking, for any system that you are looking at. So if we take the physical plane, the 4 lower are with form, the 3 higher subplanes are formless. It is no wonder that science has been able to discover only 4 states of matter, because the other 3 are formless. Now, the highest of them all is the ultimate physical particle, the true atom from a physical point of view. Atom, remember we said, means that which is not divisible. Science uses the word atom for something that is divisible, so it's a misnomer, philosophically speaking. The first plane is the true ultimate physical atom that science is looking for, the fundamental particle. You know, there are some enthusiasts in the realm of science and spirituality which they think once we get to the ultimate physical particle, we get to know God. Now, that would be true if only the physical universe exists in the universe. The physical plane, I mean, exists in the universe. If there is only the physical dimension, then yes, when we get to the ultimate physical particle, we are getting to the origin of physical matter, therefore the origin of the universe. Now, in the theosophical view, the physical plane is the last and lowest of the 7 manifested planes. So once we get to the ultimate physical particle, if we go beyond, we don't necessarily find God. What we find is the next plane, which is the astral plane. But within the confines of the physical plane, the highest subplane, the atomic subplane, is the Laya center. That ultimate physical matter or particle is combined and organized in different ways to produce all the other different states of matter. And then the astral plane, which is the next plane, we have its own astral atom, out of which, by means of different combinations, will come all the different kinds of astral matter. And the same with each of the 7 planes. So these 7 Laya centers refers to the first subplane of each of the seven planes, which is what Blavatsky discusses in her commentaries on the Secret Doctrine. Now, Blavatsky says that Fohat differentiates the elements from these 7 centers surrounding Sien Chan, which is the universe, with the elementary germs. And she explains that the elementary germs with which he or Fohat feels the universe, Sien Chan, from Tien Sin, the heaven of mind, literally, or that which is absolute, are the atoms of science and the monads of Leibniz. So the idea here is that the Fohat developed out of these Laya centers, Fohat develops all the atoms which will be the building blocks for the structures on that particular plane. If we are talking about the physical plane, then Fohat developed the physical atoms from the true ultimate atoms that is the Laya center. If we are talking from a spiritual point of view, then we have the monads of Leibniz. Leibniz was a Western philosopher, and he would say that the true atoms, not only the physical ones, which by the way had not been discovered by science, but the true indivisible particles in the universe, he called them monads, and these monads were the source of any kind of entity in the universe and any kind of consciousness, of perception, and also of matter. So she's looking at this from those 2 points of view. But basically, so to keep the process in mind, the voice, the female logos, calls upon Fohat, and Fohat generates these 7 Laya centers from which it develops the building blocks that will, or develops all the elements, and within the elements the building blocks that will form the different structures of the universe, and that is how forms can begin to be developed for the evolution of consciousness. Now, this happens not all of a sudden, the differentiation of the elements. There is a process, a gradual process of manifestation of the different elements. And this is what the next shloka talks about. Of the 7 elements, first 1 manifested, 6 concealed. 2 manifested, 5 concealed. 3 manifested, 4 concealed. 4 produced, 3 hidden. 4 and 1 tan or fraction revealed, 2 and 1/2 concealed. 6 to be manifested, 1 laid aside. Lastly, 7 small wheels revolving, 1 giving birth to the other. So let's again go little by little to see all this. Blavatsky first explains a general meaning of this and says, although these stanzas refer to the whole universe after Mahapralaya, the universal destruction, yet this sentence, as any student of occultism may see, refers also by analogy to the evolution and final formation of the primitive, though compound, 7 elements on our earth. So again, these stanzas can be interpreted in a universal way or in a more particular way. Particular as, for example, referring to our own chain of globes, in which the earth is the lowest of the 7 globes. But as we proceed in the stanzas, we approach more and more the particular. We approach more and more a description of our particular earth. So in the language of this stanza, the 7 wheels that are revolving, one giving birth to the other, that can be applied in a universal way, but it's very close to how we describe the formation of a planetary chain. So we are going to see all this. Blavatsky says, no world, as no heavenly body, could be constructed on the objective plane had not the elements been sufficiently differentiated already from their primeval ilos resting in Laya. Remember we said this ilos means like the primordial matter, and resting in Laya. So first there is Laya, undifferentiated. Then there is the differentiation of the elements. Once that is accomplished, once we generated all the different states of matter, then the worlds can be built. This is only logical, and this is actually what science is. In the description of the Big Bang, which is a description of what happens only on the physical plane, there is first the development of the primordial subatomic particles. They are all independent from each other. They cannot form any structure. The more complex particles like protons or neutrons that will give rise to an atom are not yet developed. So there is no possibility at this point in the early universe to form any structure. But as time passes, then the subatomic particles begin to combine, and they develop the protons and neutrons that develop light atoms, then that develops heavier atoms. And when all the different kinds of atoms are developed on the physical plane, or as they develop, then we can begin to form worlds and stars. So this is basically what Blavatsky is saying here. First, the elements have to be developed, then the worlds. The worlds, including our own, were of course, as germs, primarily evolved from the one element in its second stage, the father-mother. As we saw in previous classes, the father-mother is the state in which both potentialities are together, the positive and the negative, the male and female, and this is the source of all differentiation. And she calls this the differentiated world soul, whether we call it with modern science cosmic dust and fire mist, or with occultism, Akasha and Jivatma. So you see this father-mother, if you look at the physical plane, where is the father-mother on the physical plane, on physical matter? She says what science calls this cosmic dust, this primordial state of matter, that is the father-mother on the physical plane. The father-mother on the spiritual planes is what we call Akasha and Jivatma. Jivatma is a Sanskrit term used in different ways. In this case, it's probably used in the sense of the universal life. Now, but this first stage of evolution, the development of this cosmic dust, as I was explaining, from the subatomic particles into elements that we can say this is the cosmic dust that forms the nebulas from which stars and planets can be formed. So after this first stage of developing the nebula was in due course of time followed by the next, by the development of the planet. Now remember, there is now a description that all these elements manifest gradually, and there is a part where it says 4 1/10 or fraction, let's say 4 1/2 revealed, 2 1/2 concealed. So we can see that when talking about the fourth element, there is like two stages of manifestation of the fourth element. One stage in which that element is half manifested. Now, is this true of all the elements? It may be, perhaps all the elements manifest gradually, but why is it said, it is said here particularly of the four elements, 4 1/2 developed and then 2 1/2 concealed? And this is because that point, the point of 4 1/2, is where we are at this right now in our process of evolution. Blavatsky explains of these, 4 elements are now fully manifested, while the fifth, ether, is only partially so, as we are hardly in the second half of the fourth round, and consequently the fifth element will manifest fully only in the fifth round. So remember that we talked about this chain of globes. There are 7 globes, of which the lowest is the Earth. We are going to see that today too. And that as we proceed from, let's use the diagram, as we proceed from the highest to the lowest and then back to the highest globe, this is called a round. Now, evolution on Earth and the associated globes happens in 7 cycles. So after the first round of evolution is over, there is a rest between the 2 higher globes, and then there is a second round of evolution that begins. So between the time that evolution is on Earth and when it goes after Earth or when it was before Earth, the Earth is said to stay in a state of rest, of obscuration, where there is no active evolution. So the idea is that with each round, although at the very beginning of the first round, all the 7 elements are there as a potentiality, each one of the elements develops fully with each one of the rounds. So right now we are in the 4th round, halfway the 4th round. And therefore there are 4 elements that are developed. If you take it in a purely physical way, the 4 elements that are fully developed are earth, or we could say, the solids, then water or liquid, these are states of matter, then the air or gas, and then fire or the plasma, which is the 4th state of matter. But there is a further element, Blavatsky says, what we could call ether, which is in the process of manifesting. So this is why 4.5. At this point, ether is half manifested, so to say. And it will be fully developed at the end of the fourth round. It will be, let's say, visible. And then in the fifth round is when it is going to be fully developed and will be worked on and made more concrete, if we want to use those words. It's difficult to use words for these processes. So this is why probably the shloka makes this pause in the fourth element and says 4.5, indicating the stage at which we are right now in the process of evolution. Now, Blavatsky says, in the beginning, in the first round, we said all the elements are there from the beginning, but they are not manifested, they are not fully developed. So she says, in the beginning, neither water, air, earth, which is a synonym for solids, generally, this is what I was explaining, we can use this as a synonym for the states of matter. None of these elements existed in their present form, representing the three states of matter alone recognized by science. When Blavatsky was writing about this, the fourth state of matter was unknown. Actually, it was William Crookes, who was a member of the Theosophical Society and a chemist, a scientist. He was the one that was investigating into this fourth state of matter that he called the radiant matter. And he actually discovered the basis for what later on we called the plasma, the fourth state of matter. But at the time that Blavatsky was writing, science knew only of three states. So she says, for all these are the productions already recombined by the atmospheres of globes completely formed, even to fire, to the element fire, so that in the first periods of the earth formation, they were something quite sui generis. Sui generis means particular, of their own form, their own type. So basically what Blavatsky is saying here is that all these elements, as they existed in the first round, were different from how they exist now. So what we call earth was different, what we call water was different. And you can interpret this either as a state of matter, what we call solid at that time is completely different from what we call solid now. Or you can interpret it even as the element, perhaps, or the substance, like water and fire. Perhaps the fire of the first round was very different from how fire is right now, because the chemical combinations of the elements was different at the time. Actually, Blavatsky talks about dinosaurs, for example. There is a problem with science that it's very difficult to explain from the point of view of physics how dinosaurs could even move. If you make the calculations, from the point of view of the laws of physics, it's very difficult. It's almost impossible to believe that a dinosaur could move with those massive bones and structures and muscles. The force grows far slower than volume. For example, an ant can lift many times its own weight, but we cannot do that because volume, the bigger you are, the less relative force you have. So dinosaurs could not really have enough force to move that volume that their bodies have. So what Blavatsky explained is that dinosaurs are remnants of previous rounds, and that matter in those previous rounds was completely different. It was more ethereal, whatever that means. And she says, now we see the bones solid because that matter and the whole earth became more solid in the fourth round. That doesn't mean that this was how matter was in the third round, which is the previous. And now we see all these solid bones, and just because the whole earth became more solid. So in a certain sense, it's similar to the process of fossilization, for example, or the process of when wood becomes hard as rocks. So, this is interesting just to bring it up, the idea that matter in the past was not quite the same as it is today, or at least this is what the shlokas and Blavatsky suggest. And the second part of that shloka was, lastly, after the manifestation of the elements, 7 small wheels revolving, one giving birth to the other. And she explains, by wheels, the various spheres and centers of forces are generally meant. But in this case, these refer to our septenary ring. These 7 wheels are our planetary chain. So these 7 small wheels revolving, she says we can interpret them in the context of our planetary chain, one giving birth to another. There are 2 ways of interpreting this. One of the ways is that first there was the highest wheel, the highest globe, the first one, and this globe gives birth to the second one on a lower plane, then this one to a third, and that one to a fourth on the physical plane, which is the earth, and so on. It goes on up in a process of becoming more spiritual again. But there is also a different way of interpreting this that we are going to see in our next class, which is when this is true for after the chain begins to be formed. But there is another point also when the chain is beginning, in which you can interpret these globes giving birth to another one in a different way. But I want to leave that for our next meeting, and we will use some diagrams to explain that. So Blavatsky says the process referred to as the 7 small wheels giving birth one to the other takes place in the 6th region from above, and on the plane of the most material world of all in the manifested cosmos, our terrestrial plane. This is a little puzzling sentence, because it seems to imply that this process of the wheels giving birth one to another happens on the lower 2 planes of the universe, the 6th and the 7th, which, as we have seen, is not quite correct. The diagrams that we have show that the whole chain is on the 4 lower planes. Now, in the Secret Doctrine, many times you will find that there are some sentences that seem to be contradictory, but this is because they are referring to a different process in connection to this. That produced in the past several times confusion in the students. Sometimes Blavatsky or her teachers would clarify the confusion, and sometimes they just wouldn't. So when you find things like this in the Secret Doctrine, you may certainly meditate on this and try to see if you can have a certain intuition of what this may be talking to, but also don't get stuck in your studies simply because it doesn't seem to fit what we are learning. We have to remember that the stanzas and all the shlokas within the stanzas talk about far more than we can even hope to comprehend. So there will be, all Blavatsky said, all I did was to lift the tip of the veil. So when reading the Secret Doctrine, or any other theosophical literature for that matter, we should never think that this is all there is, that everything was explained. We have to approach this study from the understanding that what we have is fragmentary. However, that doesn't mean it's useless. What was given is what Blavatsky and her adept teachers thought that it was important and useful for us to understand, and the rest, as I explained earlier, will be learned at its own appropriate time. So we will stop here with the stanza 6, and in our next class, the last class of the series, we are going to explore the last part of this stanza.